Here we are once again in the middle of nowhere. My apologies for the birds, although they're smart. It's a little bit hot for them. Alright, we formed public interest before corporate interest in February 2015 with 7 members after the Frankston by-election state election campaign to which I was invited to participate in, and slowly but surely we've been building up the numbers, and currently we have around 450 members on the Australian electoral roll, and we need 550 in order to register as a federal political party. So people say, well, it's been 5 years, 6 years. The thing about politics, and I've been an activist since I was 17, that means 52 years, is that, and social and community campaigns, is that you need perseverance. In life, in political activity, there are 2 types of activists. There's meteorites and stars. That's right, meteorites and stars. The meteorite rushes into a campaign and says, we've got to do it now, it's got to be done today, we need to change things today, puts all their energy into the campaign, and within a year they're burnt out, like meteorites burn out as they enter the atmosphere and disappear from the scene. If I had $1 for every meteorite activist I'd come across over the last 50 years, I wouldn't be here speaking to you. I'd be on my luxury $100 million yacht somewhere in the Caribbean waiting for a cyclone, counting my tax-free money. And then you've got stars. And as you see, stars burn brightly. Obviously some stars get sucked in by black holes and they disappear, and obviously this happens to all activists. But when I talk about stars, I'm talking about perseverance, the long haul. Now, I've seen extraordinary changes occur in Australian society, both forwards and backwards, in the last 50 years. I've seen extraordinary changes as far as Australians' attitudes are concerned, as far as this nation's First Nations people are concerned, and I've seen extraordinary changes as far as refugees and asylum seekers are concerned. With Indigenous Australians, there's been increasing pressure to pursue a reconciliation based on justice, not charity. And we've seen over the last 5 decades a huge number of steps forward in that direction, which to a significant degree began with the Mabo High Court decision in the 3rd of June 1992, which found that Indigenous Australians, both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, had rights to land in law because of their prior occupation of this land. Obviously there are many issues with that decision, but it set the train in motion. I mean, the so-called famous Redfern speech by Keating was a direct response of the Mabo decision on the 3rd of June 1992. So as far as Indigenous affairs are concerned, we've seen 2 steps forwards and 1 step back over the last 50 years. Now, when we look at asylum seekers and refugees, we've seen no steps forwards and 10 steps backwards. Remember in the 1970s, with the collapse of Vietnam in 1975, there was a bipartisan agreement between the Liberal National Party led by Fraser and the ALP to come together as far as Vietnamese refugees and Cambodian refugees are concerned, and asylum was offered. The issue was not politicised. The issue was not seen as an issue of politics and vote gathering and stirring up hate and division within the community. The issue was seen as an issue that needed to be addressed in a humanitarian fashion. Then we saw the Tampa, and we saw that John Howard and his Liberal National Party saw refugees and asylum seekers as a political plus in their campaigns to be re-elected. And we've seen all the things that have occurred since then as far as asylum seekers and refugees are concerned. So there's been no step forward, and there's been many steps backwards in this particular campaign. Then we look at gay rights. And we've seen huge step forwards in this country regarding transgender, lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, and the list goes on and on. Obviously there is still discrimination, and we see that on a regular basis, but as far as the legislative agenda is concerned, with marriage equality and other issues, we've seen huge steps forward in this country. I remember in the early 70s when gay men were being murdered and tossed into the torrents in Adelaide and being chucked over the cliffs in Sydney Harbour because they were gay bashing, or poofter bashing, was almost a national sport. So we've moved forward from those issues. You look at the issues of sexual assault and family violence, and there have been many steps forward in both those particular issues in this country, especially now that it's been gone right into the cabinet, where allegations of sexual assault have been brought against the First Law Officer, the Attorney General, Mr. Christian Porter. So we've seen many positive reactions. As far as racism is concerned, we've seen many positive reactions. These haven't come out of nowhere. All these forward steps have come through people campaigning and taking a long viewpoint and been involved in multiple campaigns over decades in order to change attitudes in this country. So in many areas we've moved forwards, but in many areas we have moved backwards. Nothing is constant. Nothing is constant. And let's not forget on the 6th of March when we had the Mardi Gras in Sydney that their slogan was Rise. The fact that things have improved does not mean that they can't go backwards, and you need to continue to struggle to ensure that gains that are made are kept. But then we look at a society and we look at economics, and we look at poverty, and we look at insecurity, and things have gone backwards, and they have gone backwards because of a neoliberal agenda. And what's a neoliberal agenda? I know it's a fancy word. What it means is an agenda based on 4 pillars, and those pillars are privatisation, which basically are fire sale of publicly owned assets which have been built up by public money, that's taxpayers' money, which provide services to the community, which cross-subsidise services across the country, which in many cases provide a profit for the Commonwealth, and that profit goes back into the Treasury and is used to provide more services for the population. We've seen a wholesale privatisation at the state and federal level of publicly owned assets. We've now seen the last few days, we've seen the ridiculous situation in Victoria where the so-called state Labor government is going to privatise most of the motor registration branch, about 3/4 of it. Extraordinary. There's very little to privatise, especially in Victoria. Everything has been privatised, including the ports and the titles office, and most of it by Labor governments. Let's not forget that. We've seen the offloading of the responsibility of the state providing public housing, especially in Victoria, to the private sector through the community, affordable and social housing sector, and the removal of public money from public housing. So in many regards we have gone backwards. We've gone backwards in terms of regulations. Neoliberalism is about privatisation, and the next thing it's about is deregulation. Now we're told that all regulation, or most regulation, is bad, and business and corporations should move out of the way of business so they can maximise their profits and provide jobs for Australians. That's the philosophy. So regulations which have been built up over decades of struggle to protect people at work, to provide if they're injured at work, to maintain a basic income, to maintain income, to provide overtime payment. We've seen this regulation over the last 40 years removed piecemeal, and currently we're in the position where the federal government wants to pass industrial legislation through the Senate which will remove more rights and liberties that people enjoy at work in this country. And we've seen this through the destruction of the trade union movement, where most Australians, less than 12% now belong to the trade union, have decided not to be members of trade unions. And those who are members of trade unions are normally people either in the construction, forestry, mining and energy division, or in the public service in the Commonwealth and state level. So we've seen this destruction of regulations which have been put forward through Parliament in order to protect people. And we see this with the same with the environment. They call it, you've got to destroy green regulation which has been passed in order to ensure that we can tackle the climate emergency which each and every one of us face, irrespective of how we vote and whether we don't vote and how old we are, race, religion, sexual orientation, gender. It doesn't really matter. The climate emergency doesn't care one way or another. So we've seen through deregulation, we have seen many regulations, many laws which have been put in place to protect people and protect society being removed. Then we've got corporatisation. Now corporatisation is a very simple concept. You walk into any major shopping centre and you will see the same brands. That means that corporations are now dominating almost every field of human existence and work in this country, because the laws have been changed to allow corporations to grow and grow like Pipsy. Although the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission talks about competition and stopping amalgamation to ensure competition, the fact is the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission does not have the legislative teeth to stop corporations getting bigger and bigger. And as we saw with the Australian government's bruising encounter with Facebook and Google, that when it comes to facing up to these large corporations, because of corporatisation, because we don't have mechanism via which we can break up corporations in this country, apart from possibly in the energy sector, we find ourselves in a situation where small business and micro business, which continues almost ad nauseum to support the deregulation, privatisation agenda, now finds itself in a situation where it's been legislated out of business, been pushed out of business by large corporations which use their bargaining power in the community to freeze small business out of the economic agenda. And then we've got globalisation, which is a very simple concept. It's a concept of producing things at the lowest cost, and that means the lowest labour costs, and then importing them into this country and not having any protection. You know, it's one thing to see Mr Morrison jump up and down about our sovereign borders and see Mr Dutton jump up and down about our sovereign borders and how we need to protect our sovereign borders from asylum seekers and refugees. But how about protecting our sovereign borders from corporations which dominate economic activity? So we've seen a lot of backward steps in this country. Backward steps as far as job security is concerned, backward steps as far as our attitudes to asylum seekers and refugees are concerned, backward steps as far as division of wealth is concerned, backward steps as far as our mining sector is concerned and the fact that most mining corporations pay voluntary taxation, backward steps in far as legislation is concerned, which continues to benefit those people who have disposable income and are able to use this country's laws, investment-friendly laws like franking credits and negative gearing to enrich themselves at the behest of the rest of the community. So we have all these issues. We've all gone backwards. And when you look at the major political parties, and I'm even including the Greens in this, when you look at their policies, you will notice that as far as their policies are concerned, especially the Alternative Liberal Party, masquerading as the Australian Labor Party, and the Liberal National Party, you know, the Corporations Party, we have seen them pass legislation after legislation, law after law after law after law, to ensure that people are disenfranchised, not just the political process, but disenfranchised economically. So we have gone backward. So public interest before corporate interest was formed to provide alternatives to the current debate. We're not stupid enough to think we will be elected to Parliament. But we are stupid enough to think that we can be registered as a federal political party and change the debate in this country about what is needed. More resources for public education, more resources for public health, more resources for public infrastructure, more resources for the community at large, cross-subsidisation of services, the re-imposition of nationalisation our country's energy sources, nationalising the mining sector in order to ensure the profits that are made benefit the Australian people, not overseas investors and major corporations who pay minimal royalties and voluntary taxation and produce billionaires at an incredible rate. If you look at every available statistic in this country, there has been a growing gap between the exploited and those who exploit. I don't use terms like rich and poor. It's about exploitation. It's about using laws to ensure that people are exploited legally. It's about exploitation. That is the situation. So if you're sick and tired of the current situation, as my friend the Fly is here, if you're sick and tired of the current situation, you're sick and tired of what's happening, you've lost faith in the major political parties, and you're looking for a political party that is willing to raise issues which nobody else wants to raise, then I encourage you to look at our website, Pipsy.net, download the application form and join. The sooner we get 550 members on the federal electoral roll, the sooner we'll be able to apply for registration as a federal political party and then apply for registration as a state-based party in various states across this country, and the sooner we'll be able to change the nature of the debate. We are not a single issue party. We are a party that is willing to tackle all the issues. We're not socialists, we're not communists, we're not anarchists, we're not nationalists, we're not capitalist. We're a hybrid. We take the best of all these ideological positions and put the interests of the many, the public, before the interests of the few, the corporate sector. Our motto is simple: hope, not hate. Hope is the child of desire and expectation. We desire change to occur, egalitarian change to occur, and we expect that change will occur, and we will be part of that push for that change. The time for single issue campaigns has come and gone. We need a political party and a social movement and a community movement that looks at everything that's happening in this country, that tackles inequality in power and wealth. So have a look at the website. If you haven't got a computer, you haven't got a printer on your computer, and you'd like an application form, you can always leave a message on 0439 395 489, 0439 395 489, or you can write to us at Post Office Box 20, Parkville 3052. You can go to my Facebook page, Joseph Toscano, Toscano for the public, YouTube, Pipsy.net, and the list goes on and on. The important thing is that sooner or later you need to stop complaining. As I keep saying on these little clips, there are two tribes in Australia, not First Nations people and everybody else. There are two tribes. The Gunner tribe, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And a bigger tribe, even than the bigger tribe, somebody should do something about that tribe. Well, nobody's going to do something about it unless you do something about it. Join Pipsy now.